Hello, John, Robert, Matthias, and hello to everyone in the audience. I am your host today. My name is Natalie, and I'm part of the marketing team here at CoderPad. Thank you again for taking the time to join us as we talk about skills-based hiring. So my hope is that you'll leave this webinar with a better understanding of what skills-based hiring is and how you can make it work for you. So I am joined today by John Tippett, Robert Coffey, and Matthias Schmeisser. Panelists, do you think you could tell us a little bit about yourselves? Let's start with John, then Robert, and then Matthias.
Hi there, I'm VP of Product and one of the co-founders at SeekOut. So unlike the other panelists, I am more on the tech side than the actual practitioner side, but I'm based in Seattle and have a pretty long history in different tech companies in and out of HR tech. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you for joining us, John. So SeekOut is actually our partner for this webinar. So we're very happy to have you, John. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hey everybody, my name is Robert Coffey. I'm based in Dublin in Ireland. I've been working in recruitment for nearly 10 years now, mostly in tech. And recently I started my own business, HireWise, which the core model is outsourced talent acquisition. But yeah, really happy to be here and looking forward to the Q&A mostly. Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, welcome everyone. My name is Matthias. I'm Global Director of Talent Acquisition and Employer Branding at Emnify, located in Berlin, Germany. Emnify is an IoT deep tech startup, Series B, over 13 years experience in talent acquisition, big corporates like Zalando and Scout, but also small startup experience. Even had the pleasure to work in the HR tech industry or in HR tech myself. And focusing really on topics like maturing culture, hiring culture, or transition to skill-based hiring, and creating stronger employer brands and data-driven TA. Very happy to be here. Also been a co-founder of a talent acquisition community in Berlin. So that's also something that I'm very passionate about, helping the community to learn new practices around creating value for TA people.
Thank you so much for joining us, the three of you. And now that we are all acquainted, let's talk skills-based hiring. So actually, I was hoping that Matthias, to get the ball rolling, you could give us a definition of skills-based hiring just to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, no, 100%. More than happy to do that. I think what is important before I define skill-based hiring, I think what is really important that a lot of people come across is competencies. Competences is a little bit of a collection of skills, knowledge, attitudes, and abilities that enable an individual to perform a job role. Now, this is really important because you sometimes hear this and get mixed between competences and skill-based hiring. Now, skills are capabilities needed to complete a task and therefore a job, yeah? So something like along the lines like analytical thinking or active learning or complex problem solving or critical thinking. And this is how I would define it. Maybe if you allow me also, why do we need it? I mean, we'll probably tackle that a little bit later, but it's really to assess skills for candidates and how to apply those skills for job relevant tasks. And if we assess candidates in our hiring process, we increase the quality per hire by focusing on future job performance. And that literally closes a little bit why are we doing the things we're doing.
Thank you so much. So now that we know what skills-based hiring is, who is skills-based hiring for? John, would you say that it's a one-size-fits-all scenario? Can anybody do skills-based hiring? Or is it for specific industries or company sizes?
I think it is kind of across the board useful. I think it's interesting to think about like why people don't do skills-based hiring. You know, often like pedigree-based hiring is easier in some ways, right? Because you kind of have this proxy that, oh, they worked at this company or they had this title or they went to this school. And I'm just going to assume because of those things, they can do a bunch of stuff. But that's pretty limited, right? That ends up usually not being a great strategy for getting a more representative or diverse workforce. It also just limits the pool a lot. There are a lot of people who, didn't go to that particular school who could do the thing you need done. And it can often be really expensive, right? So I think about it on the talent acquisition side, where SeekOut is, we want to help people go and find candidates who can do the job, whether or not they're doing that. They have that particular pedigree. And I think that applies almost across all kinds of roles. And if you think about assessment, I think that's also, the place where pretty much any role you can do some level of assessment to make sure that somebody's going to be more successful at the job once they start, rather than just looking at, a line on a CV or resume. And then when you want to look at internal mobility, I think that's also where it's super applicable. If you're, if you want to have a culture where you can have people progress at the company and stay at the company, you really have to look at skills, because how else are you going to know that they can do a job that's outside of their sort of swim lane that they're in right now?
Right. I think there's so many good points in that answer. I would say, because we work with obviously a lot of companies that are hiring for technical roles, I think that maybe tech hiring is particularly relevant, because it is sort of somewhere where you can identify technical, like easily accessible skills.
There's sort of aspiration to be able to do skills-based hiring, but it's easier to actually assess somebody in things where, did the code work? Did their logic make sense? Obviously tech-based hiring is an area where you can apply it more easily, maybe. It seems like it's just as useful in other places, but harder to apply.
Right, exactly. So speaking of applying skills-based hiring, can we talk about how practically sort of give examples of what skills-based hiring, is and what it isn't? Just to talk about something very like a day-to-day, an example that will speak to our audience, and make this sort of approach very clear. Robert, maybe did you have an example on
So obviously skills-based hiring comes in different areas of the recruitment funnel. You can think about sourcing, or you can think about the interview itself. Coming from an in-house background, mostly, my mind goes to the interview itself, and I see it as an opportunity, really. So it's an opportunity for the candidate to show what they can do or what they can deliver to the job, and then obviously it's an opportunity for the company, the hiring team, the hiring manager, to get an insight of potentially what their new team member can contribute. So the practical side of things, it's invaluable, especially in tech. So in tech, you can have two identical CVs and two completely different performers, and you find that out with skill-based hiring. So there's a lot of elements that go into it, into executing a skill-based interview effectively, I think. And it starts before even interviewing and getting everybody aligned. I don't know if you want to go into that now or later, but that's my view of the practical side of skill-based hiring.
No, I mean, we can possibly come back to it later, but I think that's definitely an interesting point on how to get everybody aligned, everybody as in candidates, TA, hiring managers,
interviewers. Like how are you going to execute it in a fair, consistent way and get the most from that time with the candidate?
And John or Matthias, was there anything you wanted to add on sort of concrete examples?
I mean, I think for what is not skills-based hiring, I think that on the sort of sourcing side, which is again is kind of where more my focus is on with SeekOut, but a lot of people will feel like they have to have this keyword on their CV or resume, and I think that if you go to that super literal view of a skill, it's so limiting, right? I mean, and so I think you want to either use a strategy, like you could build kind of complicated Boolean to find more combinations, or you could use a tool like ours that allow you to kind of run what we call them powered filters. Other tools have different things that allow you to get at, hey, all of these things are really the same skill. If you know Python or Java, that's equivalent. And there's 7 other languages that, you could easily transfer between. And so I think that trying not to zoom in on specific keywords for everything, but using a system that'll kind of have adjacencies or compatible or sort of synonyms will really help you get at the candidates you need.
Right. Matthias?
Yeah, I think from a more talent strategic point of view is I think what we have done and that helped us a lot is before we even start thinking about skill-based hiring or skill-led organization, we looked a little bit, what is the status quo of an organization? Yeah, what are we seeing? What are the challenges in terms of maybe, what kind of leaders do we want? What are they struggling with? What is the company culture like? And then really did somehow of an audit to understand what are our key takeaways of not performing as we would like to as an organization, and how do we measure this? And then we came up with a kind of a structure that we said, look, essential skills or DNA skills, or however you want to do this, to say, look, there are mandatory skills for everyone in the organization. Then there are functional skills, which are defined by different business owners related to the different roles. And then we also came up with leadership skills, which was a little bit of a similar notion to leadership principles, but it helped us to not just look at leadership, for example, on somebody has so and so many years of experience in leadership, but instead we really dive deeper into what kind of leadership are we looking for. Yeah, and we know that leadership is a challenge for a lot of organizations, so it's really important that we set standards there and then really assess based on that. And this helped us a lot, because why? We can say, do we have the right skills? Are we attracting the right skills? Are we assessing the right skills? Yeah. How do we maybe develop this further? Yeah. And especially also what John said on internal mobility, I think it's super, super important to be mindful of what are we lacking on and what not. The skill gap analysis is probably something that a lot of people can keep on hearing in the business. So leaders need to be aware of, if I want to be successful with my projects that I have on my roadmap, for example, what kind of skills do I need in order for my team to perform them or outperform you?
Thank you. I think precisely that sort of analysis and the definition of skills that are missing, that you're looking for, that you're looking to assess, I think that really is sort of the groundwork and the base of skills-based hiring or being a skills-centric organization. And I'd like to share an example of what isn't skills-based hiring. I was talking to a TA professional last week. I was talking about skills-based hiring, and they were saying, well, like, we had all the best intentions and we've been trying to put skills-based hiring in place. We did the groundwork of defining what skills we needed for the roles that we had open. And we had that framework of like, what are the required skills? What are nice to haves? Like, we did that groundwork. And then we had a list of questions. We had technical questions and we had sort of more conversational questions. And then in interviews, we were picking and choosing from that list, depending on how the conversation was going, depending on the candidate. And she was like, I had all the best intentions. I'd done the groundwork. I knew what skills I wanted to assess. I had a framework going into the interview, but I realized that actually that's not a standardized process. And I wasn't evaluating the same skills for every candidate for that role. So that's like a nuance of where that was to put skills at the center of that recruitment, but it does have to be standardized, and there has to be that framework, and it has to be the same skills for every candidate that you meet. And obviously that's not very, very easy to do in practice, but that's sort of the work that needs to be done to make sure that you are making those skills-based decisions.
Yeah, it has to be as consistent as possible. The challenge is, especially say tech interviewing, it's so easy to get word out. Like, you can't keep asking the same questions. It's like, I'm interviewing for this company. Oh, here's what they ask, and it's up on a form straight away. So there's challenges around it, but yeah, consistency is key wherever possible.
And so I do want to get a little bit deeper into those challenges and also the benefits. Sort of what are the key benefits to skills-based hiring? Why is it even something that we should be looking to do? Matthias, I know that your company you at Emnify are working towards skills-based hiring and becoming a skills-based organization. Could you maybe share your experience on why you got started, what goals you set from the beginning, and what benefits you've seen so far?
Yeah, sure, 100%. So I think one of the things that we kind of learned is, and I think John mentioned this with the pedigree recruiting, right? So many times we see that our selection or even decision making is based on resumes, which is completely normal. But I think if you asked honestly every TA professional around the world, they know this is not a very evidence-based way of making a decision, right? And if we're already starting with this topic to say, look, what can we do to reduce the amount or like the foundation of resumes, maybe even get rid of resumes? Is there anything that we actually could do that leads to much better assessment or maybe more evidence-based assessment, skill-based assessment in that sense? So it could be like a top funnel assessment I did with my role. I'm currently looking for a senior TA partner. And what I did is I designed a 20-minute survey. I said, look, we don't want to judge you based on your resume, pedigree, or the company you work for, or your years of working experience. Could you do the test? In the beginning, a lot of TA professionals said, oh, a test, 20 minutes. Why would I invest this before I even talk to people? But funny enough, 95% did that test, and they even got more excited after the test. They actually said, look, this is not some knowledge that I needed to read a certain book and that's why I passed the test. No, this is my day-to-day. This is scenario-based, that it's how do I apply certain skills? And people got actually really excited. And on top of this tool, what we used there, we also, for the people that didn't pass, sent them the test results and some learning nuggets on how to improve this. And now imagine in an application review stage where most of the people don't even get rejections, rather, let alone feedback. That is a great opportunity to create a candidate experience there. So this is one example that I would use. Maybe another one is we felt we were not getting the quality of talent. So the question is then always, if we want to measure quality per hire, this is great. A lot of people talk about it, but do we need to prolong our hiring process, or do we actually need to change the assessment, the way we assess candidates? And I think we need to be a bit more precise. Structuring is one thing that you mentioned, which is always powerful. But then also when we talk about the different assessment methods, right, for all the tech people here in this room, is it just coding challenges, especially with the rise of AI that can be solved within minutes? Or is it maybe pair programming, right? That actually helps you to get with a team together and solve with the team together certain technical challenges, because then we look at problem solving, critical thinking, other things that we can assess, which is probably harder to assess if it's just a coding challenge that just looks at, do you speak that language or have that knowledge in a certain programming language?
Yes, and I think that's quality of hire, candidate experience. I think they're two key benefits. I would add to just because that's what we do, obviously, at CoderPad, but the assessment and interviewing part for technical roles. I think the coding assessment, like you say, that's not going to give you a full view of your candidate skills. I think that will give you an idea of, do they have the sort of the basic minimum required skills for the role, and then building on that, like you say, with a collaborative interview, a pair programming interview, that will give you that read on their skills that will be really valuable to make those hiring decisions. Did anyone else want to add on sort of the benefits before we look at the challenges?
I mean, I think one of the things that you can do, like I mentioned before, just being able to expand the pool at the very top of the funnel. And, you know, we have customers, I heard a customer just before Thanksgiving in the US a couple weeks ago, who was saying they were working with a hiring manager who was saying, you know, I only want, and this was an engineering role, but, you know, I only want to hire people who have experience with one of these very small number of large tech companies, right? And so if you have the tools, where you can go in and say, oh, really, like, let's look at the people you've hired. They don't actually all fit the requirement you're saying you have to have. And if you can show them that data to kind of push back on the hiring manager, and then you can at the same time say, if we limit to this pool, we're going to be with 1,000 people in the city who meet your requirements. And if we don't, but instead use some skills-based approach, you're going to have more like 7,000. And so I think, that's just the biggest benefit, is if you can open up the pool of potential successful candidates.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And both in quality and in diversity, like you're just going to widen that talent pool and be able to get in touch with a more diverse pool of candidates, a greater and a more diverse pool of candidates. Robert, did you want to add something about benefits, or shall we talk about what is potentially challenging?
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to what the guys have said, all very relevant. It's there's obviously pitfalls as well, but I guess skill-based hiring, Matthias, I think you mentioned trade-offs, must-haves, nice-to-haves, all that kind of stuff is important. Like when you're doing a skills-based hiring, say a live coding session, you can see what level a person's at. They might not get it exactly right, but they've gotten most of it. So you might level up, you might level down. That has a knock-on effect, I think, into onboarding. So if you decide to hire that candidate, you know exactly where he or she needs help, what they can contribute, what they can't. So they're more comfortable. It's a much smoother process into onboarding. You can plan better. If you take the flip side and no skill-based hiring, you're going in blind in comparison, really. So I think that's just another practical advantage to it.
And I think that ties in with what Matthias, you were saying about that skill gap analysis within your organization, the existing talent that you have. If you have that vision of the candidates that I'm hiring, you have a good idea of their skills, your talent within your company, you have a good idea of their skills. Like that's just amazing to be able to put the two together. You're like, okay, he doesn't have this skill, but I know that we have experts in-house that will be able to onboard him, that will be able to train him, that will be able to. It just gives you so much more, like you say, so much more sight, and you're not going in blind. And that's better for you as a company, obviously, but it's also such a much better experience for your talent. But like we said, there are also challenges. Sorry, Matthias.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, because I think it's also one of the things that we haven't mentioned, but it's a big one as a benefit of skill-based hiring, is we need to reduce biases, right? Our hiring processes contain so many biases. Of course, you cannot unbias human beings. Yeah, no matter how much training you give them, it's impossible. And don't get me wrong. But in the end of the day, I think this is something I also learned with our applying skill-based hiring. Is like when I opened the role, I had lots of network connections that reached out, or people where I assumed what John said. Oh, this person is from Meta, or this person is from Netflix, they must be good, right? And then these biases in the selection process or in the assessment process, you can reduce, because you are looking at evidence skills that are developed. And I think when people are struggling a little bit, because what you mentioned, Natalie, is like, you have also seniorities mapped to this. So if somebody has that skill, it's just not on the right seniority level, right? This is then something where you could say, look, we can get that person up to speed in 3 to 6 months, right? So it's not yet there, but it's not existing, right? It is existing, but not on that level. So I just want to mention that as well. I think that's really important.
Thank you. So not to, obviously this is all very positive, and I'm going to come in and say, yeah, but it's not that easy. But it isn't easy. It obviously there are tools and resources, and it's absolutely something that you can put in place. But there are challenges and pitfalls that you may come across along the way. So I wanted to sort of address some of those together. Who wants to raise their hand here to talk about a potential challenge?
I think one is just the expectation with candidates, right? So, there was a comment in the chat about like seeing drop off from candidates that they have to do some sort of assessment. I think that you can really set people up to fail in an interview situation if they're not prepped generally. Like, there's all the sort of candidate experience stuff you need to do, but I think it's even the higher bar when you're doing skills-based evaluation. So that's a pitfall if you're not prepared for it.
But that's it, if you're not prepared for it. So as recruiters, we should know the interview process up front. So as soon as you're screening candidates, explain the process. It's not a surprise when the skill-based assessment comes up, and then that softens the blow. But in tech, like another pitfall or pushback, Matthias, you said you experienced it over a 20-minute skill-based exercise with recruiters. Like I've seen some take-home tests and everything else be sent out. They're going to take 3 hours or more. Like that's too much. I'm not saying that's what we should be doing, but general pushback I've heard as well is the assessment isn't real life. It's not an accurate reflection. The questions weren't relevant. All this kind of stuff. So again, talking to recruiters, I would say to my team, my old team, get as much information for what's expected from the hiring manager, from the hiring team, and give it to the recruiter. So to the candidates. Like I've had very senior engineers come in and they might have forgotten the coding fundamental basic stuff and like don't oversee it, and then you have to prep the interviewers to realize what level candidate you're talking to, and you're tailoring your questions as well. So there's lots of elements to it, but a pitfall is definitely pushback. I think I saw a question pop up about candidate drop-offs because of it. Prep the candidates, give them as much notice as possible. So your first TA screen, tell them this is coming up, but reassure them you're going to be prepared. You'll have time to prepare, and give them that confidence in the process as to why you're doing it. And then you should retain your candidate pipeline.
And I think, as you say, the why is very important as well. I think that the effort that you're putting into skills-based hiring, the idea is to provide a more objective, a fairer way of hiring, a better way of hiring. And I think that a lot of candidates would appreciate that and would respect the fact that your company is invested in that. So I think sort of communicating with your candidates, I think that's very important. And I would say the only thing with setting your candidates up for success and communicating in advance, do be careful to give the same information to every candidate, just to not introduce any bias on how they prepare for the interview.
Yeah, and I think if a candidate is invested in the process, explain this, try help them see it as an opportunity. You're getting to show off your skill sets, and like again, prepare them as best you can, but remind them of the opportunity. See it as it's a chance for them to show the team they want to work for what they can do and what they can deliver.
I think another pitfall you see with customers is I think a lot of organizations right now feel like if we don't have a skills taxonomy, we can't do anything. And so they want to spend, 12, 18 months developing a skills taxonomy before they feel like they can move into, doing more skills-based recruiting or more skills-based assessment or hiring process. And I'm not really a believer in the really fixed taxonomy. I think, if you have a skill like leadership, that comes across really differently for a development manager than it does for a sales manager, than it does for somebody else. And even a skill like machine learning, that's a very different, that phrase is very different for somebody who sells machine learning products versus architects them. And so I would say don't get hung up on the taxonomy, but you can actually do, you can take steps today to make your recruitment process more skills-based without doing all that kind of definitional stuff.
Can start small, like baby steps. You don't have to have it all figured out, all mapped out, to start improving your hiring process and moving towards a skills-centric way of doing things. Matthias, did you have another one in mind?
Yeah, I think also based on the taxonomy topic, don't make it too complex. Yeah, I think we have the tendency when we build those frameworks or set up those structures that we define a skill and then have a 5-sentence kind of paragraph on that skill. That's too complex. Yeah, people need to easily understand this. And by people, I mean your interviewers, your hiring managers, the business. It actually, I think with a skill-based focus, it should reduce complexity. It should actually make it easy to use, and also create some guidance. That is something I've seen. And then also another thing that I would say, please do not come up with 30 skills for one job. Yeah. I mean, for God's sake, you can only assess as many skills like in one interview. Let's say if you have 45 minutes and you have like, I don't know, 3 to 4 or 5 skills, maybe 1 or 2 questions. That's it. Yeah. And I've seen a lot of times when people are like, okay, so here's my wish list. And then we go into the same thing that we used to do with the bullet points. We have 15, 20 bullet points, and that's my dream state candidate. And then nobody is even able to assess all of this in the hiring process. And then people creating more and more and more in interviews because, it's not structured. It's just changing all the time. And I think this is what I would also give them as an advice. Less is more. Trial this, as John said, start with one, create some learnings, and then go from there.
Absolutely. And I feel like I can say this because it's December, but it is not a letter to Father Christmas or Santa or however you say it where you are. And I think I would add just one more before we get to the questions, because I can see there are lots coming in. Because I will put my hand up and say that we have been so close to having this happen at our organization a while ago, but still it's referrals. I feel like referrals can be extremely valuable, definitely, and especially when you have tight deadlines and a specialist role. And I'm not saying that they're a bad thing in themselves, but referrals need to follow your process too. Referrals need to follow your skills-based hiring process. The tendency is they end up kind of skipping a couple of steps, or there's so much bias introduced. And I think it's just sort of an example of how important that standardization and how important that framework is. You need to have that in place, and every candidate needs to go through that same process for your skills-based hiring to work. Even referrals, even if they're friends with the VP of engineering. And so we are going to go to our questions. I see there are lots of questions that have come in. Thank you so much. Let's see. So I have a question about diversity. So Ben says he is curious about how skills-based hiring can enhance diversity and inclusion in our workplaces. So do you have any thoughts, experience, or maybe advice on how to use skills-based hiring to improve diversity in your teams?
I think we've touched on some of those things. I think that on the recruitment side, it's just a fact that if you say that, somebody's got to be at some elite school or company or certain number of years of experience, that is going to be a less diverse group than if you focus on the real skills that are required for the job. And we have really practical ways in SeekOut to be able to show that data to organizations so they can see the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I also think just on the assessment side, I mean, as Matthias was saying, like it's hard to get bias out of anything, but if you have a uniform assessment process, then you can say, hey, this person did well or didn't do well, and we're taking that apart from like, oh, I think that every software developer should be a 33-year-old guy or something. So so that's really what our customers see.
Matthias, did you want to? You looked like you're about to say something.
We lost your voice, Matthias.
I'm going to go to the next question, and we can come back to you if you can manage to get your sound back. I hope so. So I have a question here about skills-based hiring and how to sell it internally. So the question is, what is the best way to present or suggest skills-based hiring to an organization that's not there yet and is relying on resume hiring?
I think it goes back to small steps. So maybe try it with a couple of teams, proof of concept, show that it works, and then grow from there would be my best advice of what I would do anyway.
I think the other question though is like, I mean, if resume, this is like heretical in this forum, but like if resume-based hiring is working, I don't know. I don't know how you would sell it, but I would think that there'd have to be something that is lacking in the organization. Either time to fill is taking too long, or people are not, being successful in the roles once they get there, or the diversity is not what you want, or your employer brand is not what you want. But I think you got to focus on what's broken, because you're not going to be able to go in and say, oh, I heard the skills-based hiring thing, let me tell you about it. And if everyone's like, well, we have enough candidates, they're good enough, we're doing great. You got to figure out what the pain points are at the organization, and then hopefully skills-based hiring can address those.
I think the complexity is when, say, you TA have an idea of what the problem is, and your hiring managers or your executive team, they don't agree, or they don't see that problem. And I think numbers, I think statistics, they're your friend. If you can extract any numbers or statistics on the team, on your candidate, on candidates and candidate dropout, on like each stage of the funnel, of the hiring funnel, and also within your company, I mean, it can skills-based hiring can have an impact on so many different levels. And I think if you have hires that are not working out, if you have people that are leaving, if you have a team that is very clearly not diverse, like bring those numbers to the table, and I think that would help put your point across. Matthias, are you back?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So the prior question, so about diversity and inclusion, and then this question about how to sell skills-based hiring to the rest of the organization. What thoughts did you want to share?
Yeah, diversity. I think one of the things that I have seen is if we hire diverse talents because of a certain diversity criteria, let's say gender, and just because of that gender, you hire that person, you don't do a huge favor to the diverse talent, right? And so many times it should be a higher diverse talent that is great in that job, and that is more impactful and helps you more on your DE&I efforts than just for diversity criteria, because then you have that bounce back that people are saying, look, I told you that these people with these criteria are not a success. So this is always something that you need to be very careful about. And I've seen that sometimes that there was a miss. And on how to sell it internally, I think as I mentioned, right, in TA we tend to sometimes work in silos and don't work with people over the people team much more. And so what we did, we have more of a holistic approach to say, what are our challenges in our company? Yeah, why is the engagement low? Why is there a lack of maybe psychological safety? Yeah, just coming up with certain topics. Why is maybe, as you said, a retention a problem? And then really look into this, and also ramp up time. Yeah, if you think about employee lifetime value, yeah, customer lifetime value, a lot of executives know what that means, but employee lifetime value is maybe something that you also should start thinking about. How much time does it take for people to actually get productive and be set up for success in your organization? And these are ways of how you could tackle or create that buy-in, and then literally say, look, these are our problems, this is how we could fix it, and we need those people with these skill sets in order to help us moving the needle here.
Right. And I would say that to get executive buy-in, I think that's pretty key. So definitely talk to your hiring managers, but talk to your exec team as well, and try and get their buy-in, because that will support you in your initiatives. So I have questions about question about tools. Is it hard to find? No, it is hard to find affordable tech for building skill assessment simulations. Do you have any recommendations on platforms? I mean, obvious answer, I want to say CodaPad. which obviously we specialize in assessments and in interviewing, so technical assessments for technical roles and coding interviews. Are there any other tools that you want to mention? Thank you.
You'll just get cut off.
I do think with like the other things we said, you could start with you can start with process, right? You can start with training interviewers. You can start with a standardized set of questions. It's a lot easier to do that standardization with a tool, but there are things, if you don't have budget right now, there are things you can do that's on the process side.
Absolutely. I think a framework is something that it is worth investing your time in. It will just make it so much easier to have that consistency. And I would say, obviously, CoderPad is a great tool to be able to send assessments to anybody and everybody who applies for a position. If that's not feasible, obviously the pricing does change depending on the number of tests that you're sending. If that's not feasible and you have a smaller budget, then I would try to sort of have that first screen, try to pick the most objective criteria that you can. So obviously the ideal way to do it is to be able to send a test to any candidate, regardless. But if that's not feasible, then maybe looking at sort of trying to hone in on what's the most relevant and objective criteria that you can. So maybe you're looking for somebody who has team lead experience, or maybe you're looking for somebody who has startup experience or experience in an enterprise, a bigger company, B2B versus B2C experience, or knowledge of very specific industries. I'd say that that's fair enough if you need to have that first selection process just because of volume and because of budget constraints. However, I'd say do not go towards criteria like age, gender, a certain school, a specific diploma, a specific company. That is just not going to help you towards a skills-based hiring process. Panelists, does that make sense? Is there anything that you want to add to that? Hopefully we answered the question.
It all makes sense. I think get back to in-person interviews and get a whiteboard up and a marker and go. It's called old. And imagine maybe it's a bit old school at this point. If possible, do it. But yeah, no, I think we covered everything.
No, I don't know if I'd say go to a whiteboard, but I mean screen share. Your IDE, like where you normally code and screen share, and it's not going to be ideal, but if you don't have that budget, then that would be a way of doing it. Or use CoderPad. Use CoderPad. That's the best way to do it. So I have a question on upskilling. So this question is for Matthias specifically. So you talked about gaps and internal mobility. How might the rise in skills-based hiring lead to the development of more personalized learning and development programs with employers offering targeted training to help employees acquire specific skills needed for their role? I think that's a great question.
Yeah, great question. I think what we have seen, for example, and which is a common, now I don't want to stereotype people here, but engineers sometimes tend to not have the best communication skills, or let's even say social skills. But they are so eager. If you ask them what kind of learning do they want, oh, I want a platform that actually helps me to get better in certain programming languages and so on, right? But based on that fact, on academia, we know that if you want to be successful in your career, and especially in our world that is constantly changing, social skills or essential skills that somebody even call them are important, right? And especially if you then reach a certain level, maybe from an individual contributor to an engineering manager, you have certain responsibilities. It's a completely different topic. And here are certain areas where you can say, look, if I have identified what is actually missing in a certain region, it's not just what the patients, the employee says they think they need, but make them aware of the way you grow in your organization will actually you need different skills for that. Yeah. And I have seen so many times when we talk about leadership in particular that we have promoted the wrong leaders most of the time because they're functional experts. But what you do to them is you actually put them into a leadership position, because that's the only way you can grow. And that will maybe make them actually leave the company, because that is something they don't want to do. They actually are good in what they are doing. And that's why you have expert tracks, yeah, where they become principals or senior principals, and not so much force them into leadership. And so navigating this just as a learning and development topic is something where you could also prepare people that maybe are not the best engineers, but are great in communicating and taking care of people, that they are much more likely to be a great engineer manager than somebody that makes a career as a principal engineer. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I would add, so I'm going to share a sneak peek of our survey that we'll be publishing at the beginning of the year. But one of the first numbers that we have is that actually, so I had 36.5% of the developers that we surveyed are not interested in earning managerial responsibilities. So I think absolutely you need to have that career path and advancement opportunities, whether it's as functional experts or whether it's into leadership or managerial roles. I saw a question on AI. How will technological advancements, particularly in artificial intelligence and machine learning, influence skills-based hiring by matching candidate skills with job requirements more efficiently, leading to more objective hiring decisions and reduced biases? So what part will AI play in skills-based hiring?
I think we don't know for sure, but I think some of the things that are clear are, a lot, like I was saying earlier, a lot of, at least at the, talent acquisition stage, the kind of sourcing stage is really about keyword based. And I think that one of the things that's interesting about the generative AI that understands language is that you can begin to put those skills in context, right? So like I was saying, machine learning for a salesperson is very different than machine learning for an engineer, right? And generative AI has the ability to know that, right? To know that, oh, this person's machine learning expertise is in knowing how to pitch it to a customer. And this person's machine learning expertise is in knowing how to build classifiers. And so I think that some of the generative AI is going to give that kind of ability to show not just a skill as a term or a static definition, but hey, this really means in context that this person can do these range of activities. So that's really exciting to us.
I'd add that, so CoderPad has actually integrated ChatGPT into our interviewing tool, so you can use it. A candidate can use it within the interview, and I think that's a way that AI will be used, and that will be changing the way that we assess skills. Is that you're not necessarily going to be assessing whether they know the very basic, or whether they know all the libraries and they have them to command. But you may be assessing if they know what to look for, if they have a critical analysis of whatever ChatGPT or any AI assisted tool is going to give them. I think that introduces sort of another level of how you're assessing those skills and what skills you're assessing.
Yeah, that kind of mitigates one of the pitfalls we mentioned earlier, just about it not being like real life, like it's because
Right, because in real life
they can go help get an answer if they know what they're looking for. So
right.
yeah, it's interesting.
Matthias, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add also something. I think that's definitely important for tech assessment, is we should not always chase people to make sure that they use AI or not to actually solve that problem. We actually should look at how they have used AI to solve certain problems. So prompt engineering as a skill and understanding. And I think this is not just for engineers. I think this is also maybe in the future for TA professionals, that you do a kind of a scenario-based assessment and say, look, here's your ChatGPT, and you fix that problem for me. And how do you use AI in order to solve problems? Will be a key skill in the future, right? So we shouldn't really trying to, because I see a couple of people they play catch up with if they use the AI or not to do the assessment. It does not matter. I think it should matter how you use AI and how you use certain tools to actually achieve your results, because in the end we are in this momentum of the industry, unfortunately, to do more with less. And that's something where AI can definitely play a big role.
Absolutely. I have a question about behavioral competencies. So, how would you leverage skills-based hiring to screen a candidate for their behavioral competencies? And I think if we can talk about soft skills, like it is, how does that fit into skills-based hiring?
Yeah, for me, it's always how do people apply skills? Not that just that they have them, and sourcing, for example, based on the keywords or the way you do that Boolean search, you identify that they probably have those skills, but how do they apply, right? Because every company is different, every culture is different, even a talent acquisition role looks different in every organization. And so for me, I would argue, give me the context with that STAR method, that a lot of people know, situation, task, actions, results. How do you apply your skills in certain situations? And this is something that I will look at, because that is something that would probably differentiate which certain seniority a person has.
Did anyone else want to add to that? Robert, maybe?
I think that's it in a nutshell. Like the skill sets, skill-based assessment is, can you do the job? Yes. Competency is, okay, how did you do it? And take me through that and go into the details. So you treat it as two different angles of the interview.
I think soft skills, obviously, it is a little bit less clear cut, less objective than assessing technical skills. I think what I would advise, what I'd take away is that you want to have that sort of situational interview environment. So if you're looking for a particular skill, how can you put your candidate in a situation where they can demonstrate that skill, that soft skill? So if you're looking for communication skills, for example, can you ask them to walk you through their work, the way that they solved a specific problem? How do they communicate that? Or if you're looking for like being able to work as part of a team, can you include somebody from your team in the interviewing process and see how they can work together? Again, set them up for success, like tell them that this is how it's going to happen. But that demonstration of that soft skill, that's a way that you can assess that skill without relying on, oh well, they've worked as part of a team before, so obviously they have teamwork skills. Or so yeah, trying to have that sort of demonstration of that skill. Do we have time for a last question? Let's see. So there's a question about the process and timing. One of the questions is where in the interview process should you input that assessment in order to gain and keep engagement? So again, we were talking about drop-off. So I think we've talked about this already, but if there's anything else that anybody wants to add.
Yeah, the tendency is high, and that depends a little bit on the role. If you have a lot of high volume applications, then top funnel might be a good idea, depending a little bit on if you want to say, oh no, I talk to people and then do it, or I do it directly. But what I also would say, you can put this anywhere in the hiring journey. It just literally depends a little bit what is the purpose of this assessment there. Especially what I noticed this year when I talked about tech assessment on a different panel, if you reach a certain seniority, right, I think top funnel or coding challenges might not be the right choice. It rather be then something where you say, look, as a pair programming session, from a senior on to even more principal roles, this is maybe a better use of time, and don't do this take-home test topic, right? A lot of times you see that this takes forever, people do not come back, and so toolings can really help to increase that candidate experience as well and prepare people best. So that is a little bit my 2 cents here.
And I'd say that if you're worried about engagement, if you're seeing that candidates are dropping off, maybe the question isn't when, and the question is how. And maybe you need to take a look at your assessment and see how you could improve it, how you can make it more engaging. Can you include gamified questions? Can you make it shorter? Is it too long? Like, is it relevant to the role? Does it feel like
Irrelevant is a big
right?
one. Yeah.
Like, so I think that's a definitely look at how you can improve your assessment rather than how you can move it.
How
All right,
critical that
Robert.
skill is to the job as well might
Mhm.
determine where you're going to put it in the process, because you don't want to waste anyone's time getting to the end and then can't actually do the job. So that would be a big one too.
Absolutely. Right, I'm going to stop here. We do have a couple more questions, but we will try our best to get some answers back to you asynchronously. Thank you, panelists. Thank you to everybody in the audience for joining us today. Thank you for your time. And I hope to see you on another webinar. Thank you so much.